Professor William Gumede, Associate Professor at the School of Governance, Wits University, and author of Restless Nation, Making Sense of Troubled Times, says the ANC must give Eskom CEO full backing against vested interests. He says the ruling party has enabled years of corruption and neglect at Eskom. He joins us now. Very good evening to you, Prof, and thank you so much for speaking to us. So let's go through some of the things that you're saying. For instance, you're saying Andre de Ruyter's hands are tied when it comes to tackling the essential issues at the utility. I know there's some that argue that he's getting paid the big bucks to do exactly this, that it was not an easy job. He took it knowing this. In fact, I watched that a dialogue that you had of the Fix It series, and this is one of the things that he did say, that he left a cushy job, he took up the challenge of Eskom. But you say some of the essential reforms that he wants to make are politically unpalatable to ANC leadership. Why?
Thank you for having me. I think the very important thing that South Africans must understand is that the power outages we see is a direct result of state capture. And that, now what happens?
Okay.
I mean, just to repeat that the power outages that we see is a direct result of state capture and of corruption. And then the second is that when a state-owned company is captured, it takes much longer for it to be recovered than, for example, the equivalent of a private sector. Almost double the time to be cleaned up. That is why many countries actually privatize it, because it is so difficult to reform a state-owned company that has already been captured. And then the third very difficult thing about cleaning up a state-owned company, and Eskom is a particular example of it, is that all the things that one needs to do there is directly opposed often by powerful people in the governing party. For example, I mean, to clean up Eskom after all of these years of state capture, costs needs to be reduced. So, for example, there are too many people working there. But to do that, that is very difficult for the CEO of Eskom. Of course, supporters and members and leaders of the ANC will oppose that. The trade unions, which is aligned to the ANC, will oppose that. The second thing, for example, that he needs to do is he needs to cut off all of the corrupt contracts that is there. Now, if he tries to do that, then all of the political capitalists and the people close to the ANC leadership who have those contracts will also oppose him, and they will go to the ANC and they will say, well, the Ruyter is a white monopoly capitalist, or he's against transformation, or he's against black economic empowerment. So what it tells you is that a vested interest in the ANC is very much linked to what is happening.
Okay. I want to follow up on that vested interest, because you seem to tie the political fortunes of President Cyril Ramaphosa to this as well. You say he will need the backing of NUMSA, for instance, that would be severely affected if there was a mass pruning of, what would you say, incompetent staff at Eskom, that Andre de Ruyter has to sort of walk a tight line. So without some of the shock therapy that you say is needed, what then happens? Because there are people who say the failure for Eskom to overcome these challenges should lie directly at his feet, but you say it's a result of the systemic impact of corruption.
No, absolutely. So, and I think maybe for me, this is the most important point here, is that state capture, once it happens, really, it takes sometimes 10, 20 years to get out of it. That is why, as South Africans, we cannot allow the state or a state entity to be captured because it takes so long to get out of it and to clean it up. So the issues of the past is what else? For example, let's just take infrastructure there, at Eskom. The last decade during the state capture years, there's been no focus on maintaining infrastructure because the money was taken and and given to cadres corruptly. Now, what happens to infrastructure? So when you don't look after infrastructure, every year it gets worse and worse, and then you get a critical point where it totally collapses. That is the same also, not only in Eskom, but across the country. So in municipalities, for example, we see across the country, municipalities are collapsing because this is years and years of neglect. Then it gets to a critical point, and when it gets to that critical point, it becomes more expensive to maintain that infrastructure and cheaper even to get totally new infrastructure. So that again is, with the thing with corruption, you don't feel it immediately, you don't feel it the next day, but you feel it along the line, and then it takes you decades to get out of there.
So you say the key cost metrics at Eskom are captured by those with interest linked to the ANC. Now, for anybody wanting to step into this job, because I think there is some sort of belief that if you are given the responsibility to run Eskom, it means that there must be some support from the powers that be. Is that just a cosmetic exercise? Can anybody really fix it? And there's also the thing of who are those political interests. At some point, people used to say there were the Zuma years, and now there's the Ramaphosa years. But it's clear it's one continuous trend.
Absolutely, it's one continuous trend. I'll just take you one interest. There's what we call the so-called coal mafia. Now, those are people, linked to the leadership of the ANC who's made a lot of money through coal mining. And they funded in the past the ANC also. That grouping are very much opposed to any renewable energy. And we desperately need, while Eskom is struggling, we desperately need alternative energy. We desperately need renewable energy. But, those forces are so strong in the ANC that even if Eskom wants to get into that space of renewable energy, it's been slowed down. We've seen it. And then also there are some people, some interests which are ideologically, and that if one have ideological interest, there is also a vested interest. For example, ideological interest would be there are many people who don't want renewable energy within the ANC. I mean, we've even seen the Minister of Energy that Eskom reports into has been for the last couple of years opposing renewable energy for ideological reasons. Now, if Eskom executive and the CEO wants to bring in new kinds of energy, renewable energy, there will be the minister who will oppose it, and there will be ANC members who will oppose it also. He said also that is, again, another vested interest. That is why it will be very important that a president step in to help Eskom, that he gives the Eskom executive all of the political support. And maybe, one way to do it is to declare Eskom a disaster. Now, if one declares an entity a disaster or an emergency, then emergency legislation and disaster legislation steps in, and then the CEO of a company or the board of the company can then make decisions without this kind of political pressure and this kind of vested interest that interferes in their decision making.
Thank you so much for your time, Prof. Professor William Gumede.